line, fighting for the truth. With every revelation, we'll uncover the root.
Good day, Canada. Today we're joined by a man who's become the central figure in the transformation of British Columbia's political landscape. A man who dared to question the orthodoxy and paid the price for it. John Rustad was once part of the BC United, a party that used to stand for something, until it didn't. When John dared to challenge this ridiculous narrative being pushed by the political establishment, particularly around climate alarmism and the carbon tax, he was shown the door, cancelled for having an independent thought. Think about that. But here's the thing, John didn't back down. He didn't fade away. Instead, he did something remarkable. As an independent, he took the reins of the BC Conservative Party, a group that had been written off by the pundits, the media, and just about everyone else. And what did he do? He led them to one of the most historic victories in BC modern political history. Not only did the BC Conservatives gain significant ground, but they also toppled the BC United as the official opposition, a feat no one thought was possible. This is a story of resilience, of fighting back against a system that has become increasingly hostile to dissent and out of touch with the people it claims to represent. But, and there's always a but, it's not all rosy. Last week, some troubling allegations of election irregularities came to light, raising questions about the legitimacy of the tightest races in this election. Let's not forget, the NDP majority government hinges on just 22 votes in the Surrey-Guildford and riding. And now we're hearing about mishandled mail-in ballots, reports of voter impersonation, and even concerns about ineligible votes being cast. These aren't minor issues. These are the fundamental challenges to the integrity of our democracy. And while Election BC is quick to dismiss these concerns, people are asking the obvious questions. Why aren't they doing more to investigate? So today, we're not just talking about politics. We're talking about the future of democracy in British Columbia. John Rustad is here to discuss the election, the allegations, and his vision for the BC Conservatives as they step in their new role as the voice of the opposition in this province. John, thank you for being here. Let's start with this. You've gone from being cancelled by the BC United to leading a historic Conservative resurgence in BC. How did you do it? And what does that say about the state of politics in this province?
Well, thanks, Dan, first of all, for having me on. But that question alone could probably take us, an hour to answer. But maybe I'll start with this. I think people in British Columbia were hungry for something new and something different. When 1 in 3 people are thinking about leaving this province, when 1 in 2 youth are thinking about leaving British Columbia, you know that the situation is bad and that the options in the world of politics was not there. And so we presented, a very different approach. We're just straight up. They're trying to avoid the political spin, just calling it like it is, fighting for the things that we need to be fighting for, and being honest about it. And I think that for lots of people has been refreshing and has managed to connect with many, many people around the province. The coalition we put together, I think, is really quite remarkable. In particular, most people think of the Conservative Party as an older generation type party. Our major support base is 18 to 35 and ethnic minorities. It is remarkable. Those are groups that typically have voted, maybe NDP or Liberal, but have decided they want to come over to the Conservatives because they want hope. They want to see a future. They want to see something, for their children. And so I'm very optimistic about what we're being able to build in BC and where this will continue to go.
John, you mentioned hope, and I absolutely agree with you. The biggest problem, a lot of people in BC are having right now is that the fact that it's really hard here in BC to live. It's almost unaffordable. I have a friend who, very talented. He's a tech, knows technology really well, and he's very sought after. And he says he can't afford to live here in British Columbia. And, we're already seeing David Eby walk back some of his policies. And I know you've been very vocal about that. Can you comment?
During the election, we promised some significant tax relief, but we wanted to be rational and reasonable about what we were doing. We did not want to be in a situation where we were over-promising, like most political parties do. David Eby, of course, has promised many things. He's promised to get rid of the consumer carbon tax. He's promised $1,000 tax rebate for families. and he is now walking back on that promise for the rebate. He promised to do that right away, and of course he didn't do that. Now we're coming in, and he's trying to blame, the incoming President Trump for, well, because of Trump's threats, we're not going to be able to deliver on these things. It's just all bullshit. Sorry for the language for the people listening, but David Eby is a spin doctor, and he's a liar. And so when you're seeing these promises and what he came forward in the election, I'll be very surprised if he actually enacts anything that he has promised.
John, your MLA has been very vocal about this government's inaction, about David Eby stalling to come back to work. Specifically, we have Trump's tariffs. There's a threat of 25% on Canadian goods. Software lumber, those are under threat. We also have a cost of living crisis. Housing in Vancouver is $1 million. And it's very hard to find affordable living, to have a family here in Vancouver. And not only that, but we're also dealing with food inflation. Food inflation up from the last 4 years is about 33%. So, food costs almost a third more than it did 5 years ago. And I think a lot of Canadians, when they want to see a government that's moving forward, that they're actually working for their voter base. And it doesn't look like David Eby is actually doing that. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, there's lots of criticism to be had, but let's start with the threat of the tariffs from the Americans. Trump has a lot of bluster. He's many things. Some people like him, some people don't. I won't be a judge of that. But what I will say is this: he's asked for something very straightforward. He said, "We need you to protect your borders, and we need you to help stop the flow of fentanyl into the United States." I look at it this way: over 15,000 people in British Columbia have died because of overdoses, and our borders are wide open. Less than 1% of the containers coming into British Columbia are checked. Think about that. We have millions and millions of containers coming in and flowing through Vancouver, flowing through British Columbia every year, and only 1% is checked. It is wide open, less than 1%, I should say. It is wide open for organized crime. It's wide open for all kinds of things. And so it was 1997 when the federal government did away with the police force. And so this has been building for a long, long time. So my suggestion to him was this, which is what we campaigned on during the election. Let's put a police force in place. And yes, there's federal responsibility, but these containers are on British Columbia soil. Let's put a police force in place. Let's an investigative force. Let's make sure we do the checks. Let's bring in the technology for scanning. Let's make sure that we do what we can to secure that. And then let's work with the Americans and actually secure our borders and try to stop the flow of these drugs and deal with this. And instead, what David Eby wants to do is go to war with the Americans. We are a small, open trading jurisdiction. We're reliant on our trade. The most significant, by far, the vast majority of our trade is with the United States. We would be the losers in a trade war big time. It would hurt us. We'd lose thousands of jobs. We'd lose revenue. It would be absolutely a disaster. We need to avoid that. We need to be able to be tough with the Americans, but at the same time, it's the right thing to do for British Columbia and Canada. So let's just get it done and then go back to the table and try to do some open negotiations with the Americans to solve things like softwood lumber and trade. This should have happened on day one. Coming back when after the legislature, after the vote was done, bring it back. Let's get these things in place. They would have found us a partner, get through this and move on. But David Eby is just refusing. Instead, he wants to blame the Americans because he sees that as being an excuse to hide from his failures.
John, let's talk about what's really happening in British Columbia. Just last year, a teenage girl was brutally attacked on the SkyTrain, dragged by her hair and beaten senseless. On top of that, the RCMP uncovered one of the largest fentanyl super labs in Canadian history, enough drugs to kill millions of people. And yet, we're living in a province where people are afraid to even walk in the streets of Vancouver. Why? Because of the justice system, incentivized by David Eby and Justin Trudeau, Liberals, to look the other way. It's become a revolving door for criminals. John, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this.
So I was walking to work this morning. We've got an office in Vancouver, and I'm down in Vancouver for a number of conferences. I was speaking at the Truck Loggers Conference today, and I've got a number of conferences I was speaking at next week. I was walking my way to work, and there was somebody at the Burrard Street train station that's there who was obviously whacked out on some drugs. and he had a toy gun and he was pointing at people and saying, bang, ha ha ha, you're dead, bang, ha ha ha, you're dead. Like, what the hell? This guy should have been hauled off and treated for his mental health and addictions problem, not out in the street pretending he's trying to kill people. This is just absolute craziness. And this is the type of thing that every time I'm walking around, I see something like this happening. This has got to stop. It's insanity. How do people feel safe on on the streets, on just dealing with their day-to-day lives? They should not be threatened like that. They shouldn't have to face that kind of nonsense. So yeah, we got a real big problem. And so we had and I'll give you another little incident here, not nearly as serious. We had a case where during the election there was an individual who vandalized, our office and signs, caused, I think it was $6,000 worth of damage is what the overall bill was. And we got pictures of him. We actually talked to him, engaged him, got his information, submitted it to the police, and said, this guy needs to be charged. So after a while, the police finally tracked this guy down, and they came back to us and said, well, we should really just give this person a warning. I mean, we're likelihood of conviction is so small. I mean, why would we go through this? And we said, no, this guy needs to be charged. There needs to be this precedent. We should not be, as a society, giving up on charging people for offenses because our system is broken. We need to be able to go through and do this. And, the police were, they're overworked. I really feel for them because they're trying to do their best and they're frustrated because they arrest these people off the streets. They put together, hours, tens, if not hundreds of hours worth of evidence and work, and it usually gets dismissed, doesn't go to court, or when it does go to court, it gets dismissed and the person's right back out on the street again. And they're frustrated, and I get it. We've got to deal with this. We've got to be able to figure out how we can take, particularly these prolific offenders, off our streets and start, reclaiming our streets in this province, not just Vancouver, but right across every city.
John, it's funny you mentioned that because it reminds me of something from the 90s. Back then, Vancouver was dealing with a serious auto theft problem. But here's the thing. They caught a handful of the prolific offenders and suddenly auto crime plummeted. It was simple. You take the worst actors off the street and crime goes down. It's not rocket science. Fast forward today and it feels like it's the exact opposite. Someone gets arrested for breaking the law and they're back on the street before the ink's dry on the paperwork. We don't see crime going down because the same people that are committing these crimes, John, are the same being let out the same day. So, John, my question to you is this. If you were the Premier of British Columbia, what would you do differently to fix this revolving door of the justice system? And as the official opposition now, what steps are you taking to hold this government accountable to push for real change?
So I'll start with the little statement, and maybe we'll get into that a bit. But you're absolutely right about the small number of individuals committing many crimes. There was a case in Williams Lake where there are 3 individuals. When they're off the streets, when they're in jail, crime rates drop dramatically. And as soon as they're out of jail, the crime rates go skyrocket again. The police know who they are. They're frustrated, but it's just an ongoing thing. And when I was talking with the police here down in Vancouver, they told me 20% of the criminals are committing 80% of the crimes. So we need to get these people off. So there's something we need to do to support the police. And I mean, the police are understaffed. They need some additional support. There's no question there. But we need to free up their time by getting these people off our streets. So what's needed? We need more judges. We need a streamlined process, like the whole judicial system needs to be cleaned up and made far more efficient. We need to create a new path for these prolific offenders, these multiple offenders, so that they can get into the court system quickly and get put behind bars. That's where they need to be. Clearly, our current system is not working. And in many cases, when we have particularly people who are violent, prolific offenders, they need to be taken off our streets. And if our criminal system, the legal system, will not take them off the street, we need to strengthen the Mental Health Act and take those steps to get them off our street. If somebody is at risk of harming themselves or others, they can be held and not released until they are no longer a risk. And we need to be thinking about how we do this as a society, because at the end of the day, what matters? It's not just about the rights of the criminal. It's the rights of people to be able to have safety and to be able to walk down the street, to be able to take their kids out, to make sure that our society can follow the rule of law and be a place where people can be proud to call home and feel safe out on our streets. So we need to take these actions, and it's tough. We need to push the federal government for, of course, bail reform. That's one thing, but we should be pushing for guaranteed minimum sentencing. We need to be able to get a process in place where it's not just a matter of going to court and some judge saying, well, they've had a tough childhood, they've got kind of issues. I get that, but at the end of the day, with these prolific offenders, clearly what we're trying to do is not working, and we need to take the safety of people, of the average citizen in this province, into consideration when we're distributing the rule of law.
John, it's interesting you bring that up, because when we talk about people addicted to opioids, the conversation often turns to compassion. And, John, rightly so. Many of these individuals have had terrible childhoods, faced unimaginable traumas, and dealt with situations that most of us can't even fathom. But here's the problem, John. The compassion we're told to show isn't solving the problem. It's perpetuating it. Take the downtown east side in Vancouver. Anyone who's driven by it, John, has seen people hunched over. They can barely stand, suffering what people are calling dope sickness. And let's be clear, John, these people have no choice. They're not using drugs because they want to. They're using them because they're physically addicted. The withdrawal symptoms are excruciating, and they're trapped in a cycle that they can't escape. And yet, what's this government's response? What's David Eby's response? Let's give them more drugs, free drugs, safe drugs, as if the solution to a devastating addiction is just a cleaner version of the thing that's killing them. Where's the dignity at? Where's the dignity in that? Where's the hope? So, John, my question to you is this: how do we help these people?
So that's a very good question, and I think if there was a magic bullet to deal with it, it would have been done by now. But we have to change sort of our approach. Harm reduction has a place, but it is not the answer. The idea of safe supply, these drugs are not safe. They're dangerous. They're making their ways into our schools. They're creating the next generation of kids or of addicts. And in some cases, they've killed kids in schools. This is just ridiculous that we'd be doing this. The idea we're handing out free drug paraphernalia outside of an emergency room in a vending machine. I mean, what kind of nonsense is this by a government? What we need to actually create some abstinence-based recovery. Everything, and like I say, there's a place for harm reduction as well. But abstinence-based recovery has proven itself time and time and again to be the most effective tool for getting people off of the addiction and getting them healthy and allowing them to be able to have full lives in our society. I'll give you some very disturbing examples. We during the election, we talked about this as Christian's law. Christian, as a grade 9 student, started exploring with drugs and became addicted. The school did not tell the parents. This was hidden from the parents for many years. And over the years, the parents did everything they could to try to help their child. They basically were ignored, wouldn't allow. They only thought that the child himself should have the authority. And over time, they're in and out of treatment and care, and ultimately, this individual lost his life to the drugs. And you wonder about it. You think, how is it that the school would not have informed the parents? How is it the parents did not have any options to be able to look after a child? There was another couple in British Columbia. They had a son and a daughter, both of them who were addicted to drugs. And they were just like, they want to do anything and everything they can for the child. There was no option in British Columbia unless the child himself wanted to go into care. So what they did is they took out a second mortgage on their home and spent $20,000 per child to send them south of the border to a treatment facility and to get them off their addiction. Fortunately, now they're back in British Columbia. The oldest has graduated and is now into university. The youngest will be graduating shortly. And they're both drug-free and looking forward to bright futures. Why aren't we being able to do that in British Columbia? Why don't we have the right of a parent to be able to step up and say, my child desperately needs help. I want to intervene and give them that help and make sure that they have that option here in British Columbia. And when you've got these people on the streets who are facing these addictions, there are certainly situations where involuntary treatment is going to be necessary. It shouldn't be the first and only step, but it is going to be necessary. But we have, many examples now in British Columbia where somebody who's suffering for an addiction wants to come forward and get help, and they say, "Okay, great, we'll put you on the list. 5 months from now, we can get you into a recovery facility." 5 months? I mean, the person, as you know, anybody with addictions, once they come to that point of wanting to deal with addiction, you gotta seize on that moment then, not make them wait weeks or months in order to get care. There was a facility in Victoria, and this is because of this, decriminalization and allowing to be able to do drugs anywhere. There's a facility in Victoria which is set up as a housing facility for people with addiction and problems, run by a nonprofit. And the facility had to have a special room for smoking fentanyl, and another special room for doing crack, and another special room for doing other drugs. And the people would go in there and do the drugs, then they'd come out into the main area and they'd still be smoking, they'd still be doing these drugs. And the staff complained and said, "This is an unsafe environment." So they actually went to WorkSafe and said, "This is an unsafe environment. For me as a staff, we need to fix this problem." And WorkSafe said, "Well, the solution is that you'll have to wear a gas mask." One of the people in this facility, one of the people working in this facility, posted a notice on the wall and saying, "Hey, you know what? If you want to get into recovery, here's a number you can call, to get the support to be able to get into recovery and get off the addiction." Ministry staff came by and saw it, took it down, and reprimanded the person, and actually gave them a day off without pay. In other words, penalize this individual for putting it up because it might cause somebody, might cause some discomfort to somebody who's in the facility. And this is the insanity that has now become our treatment and drug, programs here in British Columbia. It has to come to an end. We need to build out additional space. We need to have the variety of options. And yes, in some cases, we're going to need to have involuntary treatment.
John, it's interesting you bring that up because when we talk about people addicted to opioids, the conversation often turns to compassion. And, John, rightly so. Many of these individuals have had terrible childhoods, faced unimaginable traumas, and dealt with situations that most of us can't even fathom. But here's the problem, John. The compassion we're told to show isn't solving the problem. It's perpetuating it. Take the downtown east side in Vancouver. Anyone who's driven by it, John, has seen people hunched over. They can barely stand, suffering what people are calling dope sickness. And let's be clear, John, these people have no choice. They're not using drugs because they want to. They're using them because they're physically addicted. The withdrawal symptoms are excruciating, and they're trapped in a cycle that they can't escape. And yet, what's this government's response? What's David Eby's response? Let's give them more drugs, free drugs, safe drugs, as if the solution to a devastating addiction is just a cleaner version of the thing that's killing them. Where's the dignity at? Where's the dignity in that? Where's the hope? So, John, my question to you is this: how do we help these people?
No, you're right about that, and part of treatment is not just the physical addiction, because the physical addiction you could overcome in a few weeks' time, but you need to be able to support people to change their lifestyle. There was an individual who tragically died not long ago in Kelowna, and he was in his 40s, and he struggled all of his life, with the drugs and drug use. And he would get clean, but he had the same group of friends who'd come back and they would get back into it again. And unfortunately, it took his life, and he's got children and a wife that he's left behind. And I really feel for the individual. But this is part of the problem is it can't just be about trying to treat the physical addiction. Some people may need long-term treatment to be able to, learn how to cope in society without the drugs, to be able to learn some life skills, to be able to go through, many of these things. Some people, it could be a short period of time. Some people may need to be longer. But it can't just be about that side of things. And for whatever reason, our governments, and not just the current government, but previous governments, seem to refuse to want to look at this as, first of all, abstinence-based recovery, but also, that longer-term recovery and treatment. And instead, they just, put them in, out the door, minimal success rate, and continually fund these programs to help people on the streets to carry on with their addictions. It's Clearly it's not working. We have to be brave enough to say we're going to do it differently.
John, I appreciate that perspective. And I'm going to kind of switch gears here a little bit. We've heard allegations, particularly in ridings of Surrey-Guildford, where the NDP secured a majority by 22 votes. We've heard allegations of voter impersonation, mishandled mail-in ballots, and even claims of non-citizen voting. How is this possible, and why are we just hearing about this just now?
So we heard about all these stories, during the election and shortly after the election, and I made the decision not to talk about this, right after the election, because I don't want to fan the flames that are going to, destroy our faith in our democratic process. I'm a person, I like to find the facts and then bring forward information when I have the evidence. And so that's what we did. We immediately went, started looking, following up on these stories, following up on the issues we have, and trying to find evidence, and which we have found. We have found now evidence of this, which is now what we've brought forward in the time frame that we had. We had 90 days to be able to challenge the election results and bring this stuff forward. So this is what we found so far. Allegedly, and we brought forward this with affidavits in a court case. We found examples of people who did not live in a riding who voted in a riding. We have found examples of people who voted twice and under variation of their names. We have found examples of people who say they did not vote, yet there's a vote registered. We found examples of people who went to vote and Elections BC said, "I'm sorry, you've already voted." So somebody had already registered a vote in their name. We know we have many examples of people who are not Canadian citizens who have received their voting card from Elections BC to go and vote. We have lots of other individuals who are not Canadian citizens who did vote. Now, the people who are not Canadian citizens and who did vote, they're not going to be coming forward and giving us affidavits because they're not going to say, "Please give me a fine and put me in jail." But these things have happened. And so what we want to do is to be able to actually suspend the penalties of the Election Act so that these people, for a 3-month period, so that these people can come forward and we can address it and deal with it to make sure that this isn't happening in the future. But probably the most serious issue we found is in a care facility, particularly for senior residents. A number of the residents in the facility have sworn affidavits, and this is coming forward in court. So we'll see how it proves out in court. But what's happened is the person who is running it helped all these individuals to vote on a mail-in ballot, and it has already admitted that in the media. Well, it's illegal. You're only allowed to be able to help one person, not 21 people in a care facility. And this person said, "Oh, Elections BC dropped us off a bundle of mail-in ballots for the people." That's also illegal. And Elections BC has said, "No, we didn't do that." So something's going on there. The individual made a $1,450 donation to the NDP and was asked about it in the media and said, "Oh, I don't know anything about that. My son does the donations." Well, guess what? That's also illegal. So it's very interesting to see how this is going, but we're following up. We have stories of this happening in other care facilities and other areas in the riding, and so there are some serious questions that need to be answered. Take aside people taking home ballot boxes and showing other ballot boxes showing up. There's some serious questions that need to be answered in terms of how Elections BC has done their job. One of the big things that we need to deal with. All of BC ID photo ID should have a C on it if you're a Canadian citizen, to make it easy so when you go in to vote, it can be checked, you're a Canadian citizen, yep, you have the right to vote. Because, at the end of the day, we need to protect democracy. We need to make sure that our democratic process is there, people have confidence in it, because if they don't, then you don't have any legitimacy as a government. How do you actually get things done in this province? So these are changes that are needed to be done. We need to be able to get to the bottom of it. Going to court has a chance to overturn the election and force a by-election. However, the bar is extremely high. There's only been a couple of cases of this in Canadian history. The amounting evidence that's needed is just huge. So we'll see what happens for that. But at the very least, we're hoping that we can drive the changes so that these types of things are not happening again in a future election.
John, let's talk about the mail-in balloting for a second. I think many people right now listening would agree that there was some serious irregularities that happened during the last election. There's, when we look at mail-in balloting, I think anyone here listening would agree, there's no way to confirm the person that submitted the ballot is the same person who signed it, who was actually supposed to be the person that signed it. It raises some serious questions. And you've got stories of ballot boxes mysteriously appearing. You've got smart, credible people filing affidavits saying they didn't cast those ballots. And then you've got voters showing up to exercise their democratic right. And, they're being told, sorry, someone's already voted in your name. Let's be honest, John, when things like this happen, it's no wonder British Columbians are skeptical whether these elections are fair. So here's the question that's on everyone's mind. Can we trust this system as it stands? Or do we need to tighten up the rules? And if so, what changes need to be made to restore confidence in the process?
So we definitely need to tighten up on the rules. There's no question in my mind. Having more in-person voting, tightening up how mail-in ballots are done, and restricting, limiting when you can do a mail-in ballot and that process. I mean, we've got lots of advanced voting options here. So what's the issue here? If you're going to be out of the country, that's fine. If you're mobility challenged, you can't get in, that's fine. But this shouldn't just be something that's done. And part of the problem is it's too easy to harvest the information and vote. One of the things that happened during this election is there now is the ability to do what's called phone voting. So you can pick up a phone and vote. So if I had your contact, your contact information, your stuff, Dan, I could have called Election PC, said, hey, I'm Dan Knight, and I want to vote this way. Give them the information and register the vote. It's that simple. There's no way to check. There's no way to know. And the interesting thing in one of the ridings in Surrey, the NDP organizers there, I mean, our people kind of know their people, and they were talking and all this kind of stuff. And they said, oh, it looks like this riding's really close. It looks like, you got a shot to be able to win this riding. Next thing you know, this is in the last hour of voting. All of a sudden, there's a ton of phone-in voting that's happening. And 95% of that phone-in voting went to the NDP. So you tell me, how's that? How does that work as a system? How do you have confidence that those are the actual people that are calling in? Now, we don't know for sure, don't know what's going on. It just seemed to be very suspicious. So I think, this sort of thing needs to be cleaned up so that people can have confidence in our electoral system.
John, I think many people listening would agree when it comes to mail-in balloting, these phone-in ballots, we should be taking this process a step further. I mean, if access is really what the government's concern is, why aren't we using tools like verification systems similar to what Stripe or Bank uses? Think about it. John, you upload your ID with a picture on it, it takes a photo of your face, and it's instantly verified. It's secure, it's reliable, and it's something we've already been doing in other industries. So why isn't Elections BC adopting something like this? And that brings me to Surrey-Guildford. Your candidate, Hanveer Singh Randhawa, lost by 22 votes to incumbent Gary Beggs after a judicial recount. And now he's challenging those results in the Supreme Court of British Columbia under Section 150 of the Election Act. He's been very clear that this is a personal filing, not a Conservative Party initiative. So my question to you is, John, is this: have you heard anything about the status of this challenge or the timeline from Hanveer on when we might see some movement on this case?
So first of all, it's important to know that in the Election Act, the only individuals who can challenge an election result and bring forward a court challenge is the candidate, an election official, or a voter in the riding. A political party can't actually file a court action. So this is why our candidate is bringing this forward in terms of it. And so that's just the first piece. So now the time frame, I mean, who knows how long this is going to take in court. Hopefully it won't take that long. We're still in the process right now of running around looking for additional evidence. Like I say, we're finding potentially other care facilities that have had similar stories and similar issues. So we're working through all of that. But my hope is that this gets addressed quicker. With regards to changes that are needed to elections BC and the legislation, it's why we've called for an independent review, both of three things: the election results, how, what's happened throughout that voting process, elections BC and how they conducted the election, and the Elections Act and the pieces of legislation that are in place that Elections BC then implemented. Because at the end of the day, the current Election Act that is being operated on was brought forward by David Eby in 2019. So there's a certain something to that kind of makes you wonder what's going on there. The other thing that we'll do is we're going to bring forward a piece of legislation in the spring when the legislature finally does get called back, to actually put a C on driver's license and BC ID, any of the picture ID that BC issues, to indicate whether they're a Canadian citizen or not, so that it makes it very simple when you're going to vote, you show your ID, it says if you're a Canadian citizen or not. So that's one thing that can be done very simply, to be able to fix that process for future elections. And the other thing, as I said, we want to actually bring forward the opportunity for people to come forward and present, what's happened in the elections without having that liability under the Election Act. Let's not worry so much about going after people and putting them in jail on this. Let's worry about fixing this problem so that our future elections can be held cleanly and people can have full confidence in them.
John, as far as I'm concerned, this should be a bipartisan issue, election integrity. Every party should be on board with this, whether you're the Green Party, BC United, NDP, BC Conservatives. What's your take on the other side of the aisle? Are they for this, or have they been obfuscating?
So the DB has already come out publicly and said he's not interested in doing a independent inquiry. He wants Elections BC to do a report on what's happened during the election. So that's kind of like asking the fox to talk about what's going on in the hen house. And he wants to do an all-party committee of the legislature, which of course the NDP would control. They control the majority of members on that committee, so they can block and they can decide, what needs to be looked at and what doesn't need to be looked at. It'd be a farce, in my opinion. We'll participate, obviously, because if that's the only tool we have, we will do that. But having that independence and giving them also the full scope to look at things, not having this restricted scope of inquiry, is what is critical, so that we can get to the bottom of just what's happened and how to address it.
So obviously, with the Green Party, they're not on board with this inquiry. They're lock stock with the NDP on this.
Oh yeah, they're what they're only focused on is one thing only, which is what the NDP has promised to look at in 2026, which is to have another committee to look at changing the elections and to reconsider doing proportional representation in British Columbia.
That's pretty typical, turn your back as so long as it doesn't benefit you, right? There's no principle in that. John, you're set to come back to work in February 2025. What's the top 3 things that you see your party's focused on? And what are the top 3 things that you think Canadians are focused on?
Well, our top priority, of course, right now is on affordability for people. I mean, people are struggling just to put food on the table in this province. So we're going to be going after the NDP on their promise for tax relief, and also, quite frankly, on the other wasteful spending that they're doing, and trying to rein in some of that side of things if we can force them to, or maybe embarrass them enough to do something. But the next thing, of course, that's coming up is what's going on with Trump, with the tariffs, with our economy. Look, we're in a situation today where 25%, or just about 25%, of your personal income tax money that you pay to the provincial government is just going to pay interest on our debt. 25%. Our deficit is the equivalent of more than 50% of what you're paying in personal income taxes. More taxation is not going to get us out of this problem. More government spending is not going to get us out of the problem. And I think, quite frankly, I think Ronald Reagan put it best when he said, if more government is the answer, it means it must have been a very stupid question. what we have to do is we have to, rein in this government spending, but most importantly, we've got to focus on getting our economy going. We've got to get mines open. We've got to get the feet back under our forest sector. We've got to make sure people have confidence to be able to invest, whether it's, small businesses or technology or whatever it may be. There's a ton that needs to be done to get our economy going, because if we don't, we are in for a world of hurt over the next 4 years.
John, let's move on the state of industry here in British Columbia, because it's hard to ignore the challenges we're facing. Right now, Vancouver and the province as a whole are dealing with some of the significant economic problems. Take the movie industry, for example. I'm hearing from contacts in that space that there's only about a third of the productions happening now that there were 5 years ago. That's a staggering drop, and it means a massive loss of jobs and income for thousands of people who rely on this industry to make a living. And then there's the forestry industry, which is the cornerstone of BC's economy for generations. But now CEOs are coming out and saying it's simply too expensive to operate here. They're shutting down mills, and entire towns are being left in the dust because the cost of doing business in this province has become unbearable. So John, what's your take on all of this? Why is BC becoming a harder place for industries to thrive?
In terms of this, let's look at the forest sector. So the forest sector right now is by far the highest cost producers. They can't get access to fiber. It takes 3 years or longer to get permits. Nobody is able to operate. We've got these duties from the Americans that are in place that are scheduled to go up here in November to 30%. It will absolutely kill the forest sector, and that's even before Trump and his tariffs and all that side of things. It's just a prime example of an industry that used to be the backbone of the province that has been regulated to death. That just takes too long to actually get anything done, and people are giving up, and companies are leaving, mills are closing, people are losing their jobs. So that's just one example. In mining, it takes about 15 years to get through the process in British Columbia to deal with a mine. In Sweden, which is, considered to be a socialist government and very environmentally friendly, or very, very environmentally significant environmental laws, it takes 2 years to get through a mining process, not 15. Like, we have way too much bureaucracy, way too much government. We've got to strip this stuff out and actually treat this like the crisis it is. We are facing a crisis, and it is not a climate crisis. We are facing a financial crisis. We're paying too much in our taxes towards our debt, towards interest. We're paying too much, in other things that is actually preventing us. We need to be focused on growing the economy and getting things done.
John, I want to talk about the next election, because I think a lot of people that are listening right now want to know what happens next. And by that, I mean, what happens with the BC Conservatives. Let's be honest, if we look at the BC United, we can see exactly what went wrong. They abandoned their voter base, they ignored the people that got them elected in the first place, and they started chasing votes on the left. Look at the carbon tax. That was a BC United, formerly BC Liberal policy, a so-called Conservative Party adopting blatantly leftist ideas. And where did that get them? Collapsed, irrelevant, and frankly, no one's shedding a tear over it. So my question to you is this: how do you stop your party from...
What I would say is please hang in there. We need you desperately to help us build a future in this province. Don't give up on us. 1 in 2 people in the 18 to 35 category are thinking about leaving this province. Under the NDP, I'm not anticipating that's going to change. But we need to make the significant relief. We need to get rid of the carbon tax. We need to, do other reductions in our taxation side. But most importantly, we need to drive the economy and economic investment so that we can see better wage growth. We can see better job growth. We've had zero private sector jobs, virtually zero private sector job growth in this province since 2019, I think it is, or 2020. When in the meantime, the private sector has grown dramatically. Zero private sector job growth, huge growth in the public sector. That, to me, is completely wrong in terms of what we're doing. It's hiding a real problem. In Canada, the latest numbers I saw, I think it's 6 quarters in a row where GDP per capita has actually been negative. That only happens during a serious recession or a depression, and yet it's being hidden by immigration numbers that is making it look like we've got some economic growth when we don't. We're an absolute basket case, quite frankly. The reports that come forward out of the 30 most developed nations, the OECD nations, have said that Canada will be the worst performing economy for the next 35 years till 2060. I mean, this is how bad the situation has become in Canada. And unfortunately, when you're living in it, you don't necessarily see it. But these are the things that we need to change. We have all the potential you could ever want. We've got all the resources we could ever need. We should be an economic powerhouse. We should be a nation that has the best healthcare, that has the best services, and has no debt, because we have all the resources we could ever want to be able to achieve that. Yet we are hopelessly managed. This has to change.
John, I want to talk about the next election because I think a lot of people that are listening right now wants to know what happens next. And by that, I mean what happens with the BC Conservatives. Let's be honest, if we look at the BC United, we can see exactly what went wrong. They abandoned their voter base, they ignored the people that got them elected in the first place, and they started chasing votes on the left. Look at the carbon tax. That was a BC United, formerly BC Liberal policy, a so-called Conservative Party adopting blatantly leftist ideas. And where did that get them? Collapsed, irrelevant, and frankly, no one's shedding a tear over it. So my question to you is this: how do you stop your party from making the same mistake?
We have to have politicians that are willing to admit we have a problem. It doesn't matter if it's healthcare, it doesn't matter if it's services, it doesn't matter if the crap that's going on in our schools. None of that matters unless you have politicians that are willing to stand up and say, yeah, you know what, this is not working, we need to fix it. And so if we can get that, I think I'm very optimistic. And, should we have that honor of forming government? Look, we've got just a huge problem. It's a massive, massive problem to try to overcome with what the sort of the hole that this NDP government has dug for us, and it's going to take time to fix it. And so, if we were to be able to form government, whenever this next election might be, um, we could actually put the framework in place to be able to get things going fairly quickly. The challenge is we're going to have to build up confidence for people to want to invest and create those jobs and be able to pay those wages. And that's going to take time, because what'll happen is you can put the policies in place, you can strip away the bureaucracy and the process in government, and then what happens is you'll get, a few smaller companies that'll start dipping their toe in and doing some work in British Columbia. And then people will see the success, and then others will come in. And then you'll get others, and the majors coming in. And so it'll become a snowballing effect, but it will take time for it to fully implement. And that's the risk that we have, because politicians are so focused on today. I've got to get this done. I've got to, we've got to get something out to the people so that, we can get elected again in 4 years. What we need is that structural change. We need to be brave enough to take the heat and do it. And then we'll be able to reap the benefits of it, going into year 3 or year 4, and certainly beyond that as the economy really starts to be able to get into gear.
John, I want to talk about the next election because I think a lot of people that are listening right now wants to know what happens next. And by that, I mean what happens with the BC Conservatives. Let's be honest, if we look at the BC United, we can see exactly what went wrong. They abandoned their voter base, they ignored the people that got them elected in the first place, and they started chasing votes on the left. Look at the carbon tax. That was a BC United, formerly BC Liberal policy, a so-called Conservative Party adopting blatantly leftist ideas. And where did that get them? Collapsed, irrelevant, and frankly, no one's shedding a tear over it. So my question to you is this: how do you stop your party from making the same mistake?
So how do we stay approach? Well, quite frankly, I'm not going to change. And here's the challenge I have, because some people see me as being too conservative, some people see me as being too liberal, and I get that, right? I mean, it's where people are in the political spectrum. But I'm not changing who we are, and I'm not going to change, our approach to what we're going to do in politics. I will always be straight up, just tell it like it is. This is what we're going to do. This is what we're not going to do. We're not backing down on the changes of getting rid of things like SOGI. We're not backing down, on making sure that we support families and we support faith. But at the same time, we're not going to back down on the significant changes that we need to do, how we deal with First Nations, how we get our economy going. Like, these things have to be dealt with, and we're not going to be afraid to do it. And so I'm willing to take the heat. You know, should we have that honor of forming government, I'm willing to take the heat to get the things done that need to be done to set this straight for British Columbia. I'm a proud British Columbian. I'm a proud Canadian. I want to live in this province for the rest of my life. I want to be able to see it successful. I want to make sure that other people can see a future here. That's why I'm doing this. And my hope is we get that opportunity. We'll be able to make those real tough decisions and then move forward and see the benefits of actually doing what's right in this province.
John, I think what you've laid out here is a wake-up call, not just for British Columbians, but for anyone who cares about democracy, integrity, and the basic idea that government should work for the people, not against them. Your story from being cancelled by the political establishment to leading the BC Conservatives to this historic moment is nothing short of remarkable. And let's be clear, this isn't the end of the road. It's the beginning of a much bigger fight, whether it's election integrity, affordability, or standing up for working families. The issue you've raised today affect every single person in this province. John, thank you for your time. Thank you for your leadership. And thank you for being willing to take on the tough fights when so many others are afraid to do so. We'll be watching you closely as this unfolds, and something tells me we'll be hearing a lot more from you in the years to come here, John. John Rustad, leader of the BC Conservatives, thank you.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for doing this tonight. Take care.
Okay.